All right, we should be live. So I am here with Daniel Ray. I guess, Daniel, I'm going to hand it over to you for a moment just to let you introduce yourself.
All right. Well, thanks for having me, Pierce. I am Daniel Ray. I work at for Watchman Fellowship here in Arlington, Texas. Watchman.org. We are an interfaith evangelism ministry. We reach out to people of different faiths, Islam, Mormonism, Jehovah's Witness, anything you can think of. We help the church understand other religions, other belief systems not related to Christianity. And I've been doing this for about 2 years. I do 2 podcasts. I do Apologetics Profile and Good Heavens. And I have a book, The Story of the Cosmos, that came out 2 years ago this summer. And I'm a full-time staff apologist and researcher at Watchman. And I've been in apologetics long before it was professional. It was just kind of a fun hobby for me. And now it's a life. It's taken about 10 or 15 years to get to the professional level of it. But that's me in a nutshell. And I'm an adult convert to Christianity. I was not raised in church. And I've been a Christian almost now for going on 30 years.
Okay. Thank you, Daniel. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for introducing yourself. And I don't know. I didn't really have much of a plan. I think we decided just to kind of play it by ear, and wherever the conversation takes us is wherever the conversation takes us. So
yeah, I thought you want to ask me whatever you wanted to ask me about stuff. My beliefs or street epistemology or other religions or whatever you want to talk about. And forgive me ahead of time. I have a manual focusing Logitech Brio, which I can't figure out how to manually do it, but occasionally it will see what it's doing there. And then it'll zoom in and out of focus too. So I have no control over that, but I'm not very technically savvy. You younger folks, you guys know your computer stuff. I don't know what I'm doing.
It's funny that you apologize for your camera being out of focus while I'm over here, like in the Matrix here. So, you don't have to apologize, obviously.
All right. So we have some interesting video here. Yeah, I've not seen this effect before.
Neither have I. I was trying to get it figured out last night because I usually just turn the exposure way down and I look like a black darkened figure. But I figured I found this instead because my other one wasn't working. So
now this is AI simulation. Maybe
apparently
it really is. It reminds me like I'm talking to HAL 9000 or something. You know who HAL 9000 is? Is that before your time?
Okay, before my time, yeah.
2001: A Space Odyssey. Yeah. Is it going to hurt, Dave? It's the computer the guy has to kill. And if you look him up on YouTube, he's a red dot. But he's Stanley Kubrick, I think, his idea of artificial intelligence. But it's kind of scary because it seems to be maybe where we're going with computers. At least it's a fear that some people have about artificial intelligence. Will it take over? Tell us what to do. But I'm not so sure that AI will ever get to that point. I read a philosopher of science, Mary Midgley, who makes the prescient point that our science, as fascinating as it is, has our errors built into it. It's never going to be more than the best of our minds, because scientific tools are ideas in the minds of human beings, and we are even if you're not a Christian, we recognize that human beings have problems. And so when we make stuff, embedded in the stuff we make is our ignorance of the world and what it's going to do, because we don't quite know what impacts our inventions are going to have. But flawed people can't make perfect machines, right? There's always going to be something.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm pretty boring. I'm not. You and I, just for background for people, so people know, how did Ray get on Watkins's channel? What's going on here? Well, as you know, Pierce, just for your audience sake, I'll just tell everybody, because you and I have had back conversations, which is pretty much a standard for me going forward with any conversation with someone who is, skeptical or an atheist or whatever. I like to get to know them first before I go on a camera or a show with them. I used to be eager to just go on whenever, but now because I work for Watchman, my accountability is my boss has set it up for me to where I get to know somebody and have private conversations with people. And after a time of doing that, I feel like, okay, yeah, we can do this. And so you and I have had a lot of conversations on YouTube, on email, and we had 1 or 2 private Zooms, I think. So yeah, I was willing to go for it. I told my boss, I said it'll probably be fine, and just have a casual conversation. And Pierce doesn't seem like he's out to get me. I don't know.
No, I'm not out to get you.
Maybe he is. I don't know. But I sent you a copy of Story of the Cosmos. And did you get it yet? Have you gone over to Jerry's? You still over at his office?
I was supposed to go over there last Saturday, and then he canceled, so I wasn't able to make it. I actually saw him yesterday at just a total random happenstance, but he didn't have the book with him. So
okay, all right,
yeah.
Well, fire away. What do you want to ask me, man?
Okay, I guess we can talk about your belief in Christianity if you'd like.
Sure.
So, I mean, I kind of know what you believe.
Yeah.
Through our conversations, I think I'm pretty confident in what you believe. I'm not so confident in what makes you believe it, though. So, I guess if we wanna get into that.
Okay. Yeah. I know. And I will probably touch on street epistemology things here because I know that's how we met.
Mm-hmm.
So when I say SE, I kind of know where you are with it, but stop me if my generalizations of SE do not represent what you think, because as you know, in the SE community, it seems there's a wide variety of how people interpret what street epistemology is.
Yeah,
there's,
sure.
there's some basic stuff, but if I say something that doesn't represent your position, just let me know.
Okay.
But I think one thing in SE, and then we'll go right into what I believe. I think there's this underlying tendency just to narrow down like a reason, which I think it's kind of reductionistic. I mean, it's not a terrible question. It just assumes a kind of an idea that there's just one thing that causes a person to believe. You know what I mean? I mean, yeah. I'm not saying this is your position. I'm just kind of addressing it broadly that, there's this effort to let's whittle it down to the one reason why somebody believes in God. But so I think there's a lot of factors that go into it. I know there was in my life when I became a Christian when I was in my mid-20s, that I couldn't, and I have never been able to point to a single moment in time when I went from not believing to believing. It was more of a process over time that involved a lot of different factors. But you couldn't isolate just one of them and say, well, there's the reason. But as I've given my testimony online, people that have, I mean, this is all public stuff that, I've struggled with depression all my life, and my father took his own life when I was in high school. And I've frequently said that Jesus is the reason I'm still alive. I outlived my dad, and it's because of Christ. I attribute that. And some people say, well, that's the only reason Ray believes in Jesus. Well, no, not at all. Or, part of my testimony included my girlfriend at the time taking me to church. And there's the reason Ray believes. Well, she didn't stick around after I became a Christian. Ironically, she broke up with me. So the girlfriend, got me there, but she didn't stick around, and I wasn't doing it for her for certain. So there's a multitude of factors. But to try to address the question of if I had to isolate one particular thing, I would say the foundation of why I believe is Jesus himself. Because I didn't know anything about Christianity when I was 25. I knew nothing about it. And I didn't know anything about the Bible. I didn't know anything about apologetics. Nobody gave me a sound argument that led me into Christianity. I believe it was Jesus, the person of Jesus himself, gently, gradually revealing himself to me over time, to where after I was baptized, then I really started reading the Bible more in earnest. And I think there was a great deal of ignorance about Christianity on my part even after I got baptized. I certainly was not a biblical scholar after I got out of the water. There was a lot, a lot of studying and research and reading I had to do. And quite honestly, the first couple of years of Bible reading were very enjoyable, and I was very excited to read this. But without proper guidance, I wasn't discipled very well. Well, I wasn't discipled at all. I didn't even know what discipleship was, but I was just trying to read the Bible on my own. And I kept a journal about what I was doing, but I struggled through the Old Testament. And I thought, well, if I'm a Christian now, I have to obey God. And well, the Old Testament seems really difficult. How can I obey these things? Especially if I mean, this is really this is my earliest challenge with the scriptures is okay. So what does it mean to obey God in these contexts? And so where this really hit me squarely was the book of Proverbs, which I really like. And I really liked. One of my favorite verses from that time was Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding, and in all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. I love that verse, and I still do. It's still like one of the staple verses that I memorized and stuck with me. But then as I read the whole entire book of Proverbs, I started to feel like I was more like the proverbial fool than I was the wise person in Proverbs. And now as a baby Christian, I didn't understand what I was experiencing at the time. Now having a lot more knowledge about my experience, being informed, as Augustine said, faith-seeking understanding. I believe in Jesus now, and I got to understand exactly who this person is, who is this man from Nazareth. And what I was experiencing at the time was the sting of the law. And Martin Luther would call it the law, bringing death, as Paul says in Romans 7. Paul would not have known that he was sinful unless he knew the law. If the law said thou shalt not covet, Paul didn't know coveting was bad until the law reveals it. And so what I was experiencing as a young Christian was the law working on my heart. And secretly I thought, well, everybody else as a Christian is it must be the good people. Why do I feel like such a fool? I feel like this book is reading me. So I didn't really tell anybody I was having this problem, because I was like, man, this is really hard. How do I get out from under this burden of being the fool? Because the Proverbs speaks repletely about kisil, which is the Hebrew word for fool. And but really what I realized was that's the law working on me, showing me that I fall short of the law. Romans 3:23, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And so it's through Christ, who has fulfilled the law. Thankfully, I learned this. Actually, I learned this. It took me a long time to learn this, but Jesus was the fulfillment of the proverbial law, of the Old Testament law, of the Ten Commandments, of the Devarim. That Jesus fulfills this, and Jesus is the wise man of the proverb, and we are all, as fallen, sinful human beings, the proverbial fool. We all are. We all fall short of the glory of God, and so that was the first real struggle I had in wrestling with Scripture. But it was also a confirming aspect for me in that the Bible, I felt, really as a book, wasn't just a book. It was reading me. It was showing me what was on the inside of me, and I was wrestling with that. Well, how can I be a Christian and still be the guy who seems more like the fool? But that's the way the Scriptures work, revealing our sin nature and our need of Christ, and then taking us to the New Testament and recognizing exactly what Jesus has done. He was perfectly obedient on our behalf, but then took the penalty on himself for being our sin, for falling short, for my foolishness, and in turn extended his righteousness to me and forgave me of the sin that so easily ensnares me, and gave me eternal life. So it's been a long, difficult, arduous process, a lot of suffering and doubt and struggle. But seeing Jesus sort of experience everything, there's so many things I could tell you over the course of the last 30 years. But that's just the general gist of it. That's how I got started with it. And that's how I recognized what I would consider to be the veracity of Scripture, not knowing anything about textual criticism. Just as a brand new believer without much knowledge of the Christian faith, I just started reading the Scriptures, and they worked on me.
Okay. I got you. I think I understand where you're coming from. I think the words are getting unpacked in my mind, and I think I have an understanding of where you're coming from. I just briefly wanted to go back to when you're talking about reasons, and you seem to suggest that SE just kind of laser focuses on this one reason, and one reason is the only reason to be confident in a belief. And I'm not so sure that that's SE's position. I'm in no position to speak for SE as a whole. But for me personally, I don't think there's any like limit on the amount of reasons that someone can have that gets them confidence in a belief. I think that's pretty much unlimited. I mean, probably someone's not going to have like 1,000 reasons or anything crazy like that, but I'd say there's a minimum of one, and then not really a limit on that upper end. At least that's just my particular idea on that. But anyways, getting back to what you said, so it sounds like Jesus himself is the main reason for your belief. It sounds like you read scripture, and you said that it read you. So it sounds like it was something that was like really impactful while you were reading it. Yeah. So I guess you want to talk about that a little bit more about Jesus, more about the scripture reading you.
Sure. It's fascinating to me that, you know, you may hear cows in the background. I'm sorry for that. Cows and tractors. Right. I live out in a farm. So anyway, we have, you know, as I've learned at Watchman, even in the last couple of years, and just having had several hours of talking to Jesus among other world religions, the uniqueness of Christ. And this is only something I've come to learn, you know, recently through Watchman. I mean, I've always understood it, but I've appreciated it more. That every major religious system has something to say about Jesus of Nazareth. He seems to be he's the in Christianity. You're not there's not a tacit concession to revering other gods. In fact, the early Christians, first century, were ridiculed as atheists because they rejected the Greco-Roman pantheon. In fact, Pliny the Younger's letter to the Emperor Trajan in AD 110, 112, he's asking for advice about how to deal with Christians in his area because they're everywhere now. And he was inquiring about that, and he would try to get them to renounce Christianity. Many of them did, but those that were obstinate about their belief were persecuted, were killed, according to what Pliny said to Trajan. Trajan didn't really think that was a great way to go, but understood the course of it. Anyway, here you have something radical in the person of Jesus. First century New Testament scholar Larry Hurtado talks about the radical idea of these early first century Jewish converts to Christianity worshiping a person as Yahweh. This was absolutely nuts. This little sect of Jewish monotheists all of a sudden start worshiping a person, which absolutely in the Old Testament was absolutely no. I mean, this is why the Jews were ready to stone Jesus in John 8:58 when he says, "Before Abraham was, I am." And they picked up stones to stone him because he was saying the Yahweh name. You know, that's the name that God reveals to Moses at the bush. I am who I am. He is the ground of all being. It is a name that means being itself. There's this fascinating obsession, if you will, with the non-Christian world having to have something to say about the man from Nazareth. I mean, he's in the Islamic scriptures. He's in the Quran as Isa. He's not. I mean, it is Jesus, and the Muslims refer to him as a prophet. They affirm him. They affirm Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Jesus. But Jesus was just a prophet in a long line of as many as 120,000 prophets, going all the way back to Adam. So there's an overlap with Islam. Islam in the Quran calls the Gospels the Injil, and they tell Muslims. The Quran tells Muslims to go to the Injil, the people of the book, to consult and follow and obey Isa. So that the Muslims have something to say about Jesus. Of course, the Jewish religion does too. And Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, Hinduism, even Gandhi, I was talking to Gary Habermas, Gandhi knew who Jesus was, but he could not accept Jesus as divine. But there's this respect and a reverence for the person of Jesus. There's been widespread movement in the last 150, 200 years since German higher criticism. That's kind of an offshoot that says Jesus was just a myth. But he is the central person of human history, whether you think he existed or not. We're still talking about this itinerant rabbi from a lowly Judean province called Nazareth, who was put to death by a Roman official, Pontius Pilate. Who is this guy? Why are we still talking about him? And so for me, when I began my Christian faith, immediately I sensed that there was this person named Jesus was talking to me. Not audibly, not at my bedside. I didn't see any visions or anything, but basically my initial conviction that started my Christian faith was Jesus was a real person. Jesus was God, and the Bible was his word, and he wanted me to read it. And those were the convictions that they would say, they happened before I was going to church. I was just like, what is this? And I was calling people that I knew were Christians and asking them, well, how does God speak to you? How do you know? I was asking all these why questions because I was having these experiences and I didn't know anybody that I could talk to about it. And so I'm like, who is this person? Who is Jesus? Why am I, and I've had friends, before I was a Christian. I had a coworker who was a Christian, and he and his wife would have me over for dinner, and they would talk about Jesus and the resurrection. And the one thing that threw me off was how, it just seemed strange to me, Pierce. And I understand, as an unbeliever in his mid-20s, I understand how strange, how foreign the idea of Jesus being God sounds to people's ears. But the centrality in my life, he's how I began. He is how and I can't, it's hard. It's like this, Pierce. I cannot, we use our eyes to see things, right? We use our eyes, when we see things, we see through our eyes, we see with our eyes, but in the act of seeing, we don't see our eyes. In other words, I can't use my eyes to look at the interior of my eyes. I mean, I can look in a mirror, but aside from looking in a mirror, it's really a wonderfully strange phenomenon to contemplate, that we can see with and through our eyes, but we can't see our eyes physically. Yeah. And I think that's the way in which faith, all of those mental constructs that we use, that's the same kind of thing. We see through these things, but we don't see these things themselves. We all affirm that we have eyes, even though we can't see our eyes. Without looking in a mirror, you can't describe what the interior of your eyes look like. And so to me, I think that's how faith, logic, reason, all these mental constructs that we use, all the metaphysical ideas in philosophy are kind of eyes through which we see the world. And I think that's exactly what the Bible talks about in terms of spiritual sight. Jesus uses analogies of the man born blind in John. He was born blind so that the glory of God may be revealed. The disciples were like, who sinned, Lord? Did this man's parents sin, or did he sin? Jesus said, no, neither his parents nor he sinned. He was born blind for the glory of God. For that moment when Jesus healed him, and he received not only his physical eyesight, but his spiritual eyesight as well. And he went on to use that against the Pharisees, who said they saw spiritually God, but they were actually blind. And that's what enraged them when Jesus would confront them about their spiritual blindness. So I think eyesight is a great analogy for how we see, how I see Christ. I see the world through the eyes of Jesus, and through the eyes of Christianity. And we all have a lens, we all have eyes through which we see the world. And in Luke 24, when you have the disciples who were going back to Emmaus, well, it looks like we lost. Why am I hanging around Jerusalem? Jesus is dead. Let's go home. And Jesus approaches them on the road to Emmaus, and they don't even recognize him. They don't even physically recognize him. Their physical sight, they don't see that they're talking to their teacher. And their words reveal that they are spiritually blind as well, because Jesus tells them that Philip, I forgot which one of their names, but one of them says to Jesus, are you the only one who doesn't know what happened in Jerusalem these last few days? In fact, Jesus is probably the only one who really knows exactly what happened. So they don't recognize Jesus, and they don't understand why he had to die. And so let's just go home. And, and that's the disciples in the end of John. Let's just go back to fishing. I don't know where Jesus is. This is crazy. What's going on here? So Jesus has to restore our spiritual sight and give us the proper eyes, I think. And I think with that in mind, and just on an apologetic intellectual level, like I said, just recognizing the centrality of Jesus. When I've talked to atheists and skeptics or people of other religions, I've talked to Muslims, I've talked to Jehovah's Witnesses at my door, I've had Mormons over to my house. We do our book club. We're always talking about Jesus, no matter what it is, And so I think, Pierce, both personally, apologetically, Jesus is central to our culture, and I think to the world, even though, a lot of people reject him. One form or fashion. I think if he doesn't come back tomorrow and tarries another 2,000 years, I can predict that people will still be talking about him 2,000 years from now if he hasn't yet returned, or we haven't destroyed ourselves, whichever comes first. But anyway,
I agree with you on that.
Yeah, I just cut me off from rambling, because I think I answered your question, but I don't want to. Okay.
You definitely answered the question, no doubt about that. I'm taking some notes. Hopefully you don't mind.
No.
Keeps me on track. Okay, cool.
Sure.
All right. So what I wrote down were a few different things. So what I got was Christianity is unique. Is that kind of one of the points that you were making, I think?
Yeah, and I can certainly expand upon what I mean by unique.
Sure.
If you like,
Yeah, I'm just going to go through the list, and then I guess if you want to go back through the list after, and you can see where we end up there.
Sure.
The other one was other religions know who Jesus is, like you said. A lot of other religions, acknowledge him, talk about him.
Yeah.
You said that Jesus was talking to you. Obviously, you said not like audibly or anything like that, but talking to you probably spiritually, it sounds like to me. Okay. All right. And then, what did I write down here? Oh, I don't remember you saying that, but you must have said it. It's Jesus sounds strange. Oh, that's not actually a reason. I just wanted to respond to that.
Yeah, no,
for me.
It was sympathetic. I was trying to be empathetic to people that don't know Christ, and I understand and recognize how strange Christian doctrine sounds to people who are not Christians, because I was once on that side of the fence.
Gotcha.
That's what I meant by that.
It actually doesn't sound strange to me, oddly enough. It doesn't sound true to me, I guess, in that way. But it's such a popular thing, and it's pretty much everywhere. Kind of like you were just saying, Jesus has made a huge impact on culture, right?
Yeah.
That I don't really even find it strange. I just find it as a thing, I guess.
Okay. Well, you were farther along to be compassionately empathetic about it, because to me it was just wacko.
Oh.
I was living in Los Angeles. I had long hair and still have my tattoos, but I wanted to be a rock star, and there could be nothing further from sanity and rationality than trying to be a rock star. Number one, that was just an idiotic lifestyle. But number two, when you're basically living for yourself and you never really had any sort of familiarity with religion, this idea of Jesus rising from the dead, people rising from the dead, all this stuff just, but my friends were such nice people. I'm like, how could such nice people believe these things? And I was just struck by how genuine and authentic they were. Even though if maybe they were mistaken, there had to be something more to this, because he was my boss at work, and they had a couple kids and a beautiful family, and life was going pretty well for them. And I was like, these aren't dumb people. But in Los Angeles at the time, I'm 21, I want to be a rock star and all this stuff. It just sounded nuts to me. So
yeah, I can understand that.
And I know it still sounds crazy to a lot of skeptics and atheists, because I talk to them a lot. So just affirming to your audience maybe that I'm sympathetic to how crazy it does sound. Yes, I've been on that end.
Got it. Okay. So I guess if we want to go back up to the top of the list, Christianity being unique, I guess I guess would this be kind of one of those many reasons for your belief? Is that a fair statement? Or
Well,
oh, you're cutting out audio wise. Can you repeat what you said?
Oh, sure. I think it's something that developed in my thinking about Christianity much later.
Okay.
In 1993, I didn't know exactly. I didn't know anything about religion. I didn't know anything about Christianity, let alone other religions. So this developed over time, and it's kind of going back to what I think it's Augustine, who encapsulates kind of my experience, my faith-seeking understanding that God begins this journey in my life and then sets me on a course, a path, a way, which is interesting. It's the word curriculum that we use. It's Latin for curricula, the way. We teach kids in a certain way, a curriculum, a way, a path, a designated path of learning. In Buddhism, there's the four noble truths, and one of them is the way out of suffering. So this was the way in which Jesus began it, faith-seeking understanding. So Jesus starts this journey and then calls me to this life of the mind and life of studying Christianity, because I'm extraordinarily curious. If I'm going to, I have got to do my homework. I'm the last person on the planet to just glibly accept something. And so, I mean, I'm not saying this proves Christianity is true. I'm just saying this is my experience where I investigated this right from the bat and struggled through it personally. So there was a personal tentatio, a personal wrestling, like Genesis 32 and Jacob wrestling with the angel. There's a personal wrestling at my own level in my own life, my own private and personal life, through struggle and trial. And then there's as I'm concordantly experiencing the personal struggles, I'm delving into this stuff as much as I can, asking questions, reading, talking to people, which probably landed me at my job where I interview people now and ask them about their books, which is I love to do. So my job is kind of like the pinnacle of what God has brought me to, sort of as he said, he's brought me along this way and has prepared me through these things to be doing what I'm doing now. So I'm a watchman, and we are what we call in the Christian ministry a discernment ministry that we use. We begin with the assumption that God exists. Jesus is who he said he is. The scriptures are reliable, and then we examine other worldviews. And did you ask me about uniqueness or?
Yeah.
Okay, so sorry, I'm like, whoa, wait a feel. How did I miss this? All right, so the uniqueness of Christianity is basically this. Getting back to Jesus, if we were to define a religion as a set of precepts that people live by, that maybe accept at least at a minimum a metaphysical, non-physical realm that may or may not be spiritual or divine. It's hard to define religion if you really try to boil it down. But basically, a religion is a set of precepts that generally accept something metaphysical or spiritual or divine in nature, and it impacts the way you live and think and see the world. And so in the sense of religious traditions, which we are most aware, with Islam, Judaism, Christianity, Mormonism, all the other sects that you might want to consider, I think the primary thing that sets Christianity apart is of course, Jesus of Nazareth, but exactly what you're supposed to do, Pierce. Here's the difference. So I was talking about Proverbs earlier. In traditional religious systems, the fundamental tenet that you will always find is man trying to appease God in some way. You have the 5 pillars in Islam, the Shahada, or you have the Salat, or you have these things that you have to do. And then if you do these things, you go the Hajj, for example, if you go to Mecca once in your lifetime. But what if you can't get to Mecca? Or what if when you were in Mecca, you didn't do right, or you something went wrong, or your prayers aren't enough, or you didn't pray right, or there's nothing in the Quran, Pierce, that assures a Muslim that he's actually going to be accepted by Allah. It's a performance-oriented appeasement. Judaism, Mormonism, any religious system that you can think of are man trying to please or appease God by his own merits. Christianity is completely the opposite. That we are told from the beginning, there's nothing that we can do to merit God's favor. because that if we could, Pierce, here's the difference. The distinction is that the elite within any religious tradition that have available access to the resources, whether you're a temple priest, I mean, this was the money changers problem in John 2. That's why Jesus was so angry, because only those who had money could afford to buy the necessary temple sacrifices. And Jesus is like, look, you don't make my house into a house of merchandise. This makes the elite, people with the ability to do things, the only ones who can access God. If you're smart enough, you've studied your scriptures enough, you've got enough doctorates, you have enough money, you have enough intelligence. Christianity wipes all that out. It's not to say that our achievements are insignificant, but they are insignificant when in trying to earn God's favor or justification. You might look at it this way. In Christianity, in other religions, we are in the dock on trial, guilty, and we are trying to bribe the judge. There's nothing that we can do to earn the judge's favor. We have to go by the law. But in Christianity, the judge steps off the bench, takes off his robe, and puts his robe on us, and then puts the shackles on him. So God, in the person of his son, fulfills the things that we need to do in order to be justified before God. Because the Israelites' problem was they thought they could obey the law. And that's who Jesus was confronting in the Pharisees. They built up a tradition upon a tradition, but they could not achieve God's favor through the meticulous structures that they had built. This is why the rich young ruler comes to Jesus and he says, "What thing must I do to inherit the kingdom?" And Jesus says, "Well, what do you know of the law?" And he rightly says a few things, honor thy mother and father and all of this. And Jesus says, "You lack one thing. Go and sell your stuff and come and follow me." And what does the guy do? He walks away sorrowful. The disciples are like, "Wait a minute, Lord. If he can't do it, where's that leave us? If the rich young ruler can't do that, then who can be saved?" And Jesus says, with men it is impossible, but with God all things are possible. And what Jesus points out there is that even in one point of the law, you're guilty in all points of the law. And so the religious leader, the rich young ruler, had built up this tradition and idea that he was pleasing God by the things that he did. But Jesus nailed him on that one weak spot. You can't sell your stuff. You don't have the power to sell your stuff. And that verse is not about selling your possessions. That's about the law. That's about us. We all have it, Pierce. We all have the one thing or several things that we can't stop doing. And Jesus is saying that's the thing, that nobody can do the law. Nobody can be right before God. Nobody can be justified. So Jesus, God in the person of his son, Jesus does all the right work. He is the only one who appeases God in perfect righteousness while he's here on earth. He does everything required of the law. But then he's punished as though he was a lawbreaker. But both of those things are transferred to us. So Jesus transfers his righteousness so that his perfect obedience is credited to us, you and I, when we accept that we are sinful and fall short of the law. Well, Jesus has covered that for us. He has fulfilled the law for us. And then he dies in our stead in taking the penalty of the law, which is death, which is why the Jews wanted to stone Jesus for blasphemy, because under Jewish law, you don't say you're God. Only God is God. And so that's why they wanted to kill Jesus, because he blasphemed that he was the Son of God. In fact, when the high priest says, "Are you a king?" Jesus says, he says to him, "You will see the Son of God coming in the clouds of glory." And the high priest, hearing Jesus' response, tears his robe because that's blasphemy. I think it's Matthew 26, I believe. But anyway, this is the uniqueness of Christianity, that God does for us what we cannot do for ourselves. We don't earn justification, the right standing before God. God justifies us. And so we don't earn our way to God. Because if we did, Pierce, then maybe you might have a distinct advantage over me because you have these gifts and abilities or knowledge or skills or money or whatever. Or social standing in the temple, or the right people, or you talk to all the right people or whatever. But then then we start getting into the aspect of human advantage. Are you smarter than me, Pierce? Are you do Christians, are they smarter than other people? No. God levels the playing field. It doesn't matter what your skin color is, doesn't matter your ethnicity, doesn't matter where you're from, doesn't matter how much money you have. It's a level playing field. We're all guilty before God, but God makes that right in Christ. That's what righteousness is, being right with God, set apart for God. So that's the uniqueness, I think, in Christianity versus other religions.
Okay, I think I got a good understanding of it. So in Christianity, you're not trying to please this God. You're not trying to do things uh, because to make God happy. You accept Jesus, and you just kind of yeah, I'm just going to kind of stop talking about that.
No.
I think
Well,
I understand, but I'm having trouble putting it back into my
no,
own
no.
words. But
Let me just clarify when you said please God. Let
yeah,
me make a distinction that I'm talking about a legal term, justification. So
okay,
it's not. I'm not saying that as a Christian, there's nothing I can do to please God.
okay,
I'm saying that becoming right with God is a matter of justification. So there is nothing a human being can do apart from Christ that would appease God's justice. Okay. Does that
okay.
make sense?
Yeah,
But
got it.
as a Christian, you can do things that are pleasing to God, that he's,
Gotcha.
if you want to quote unquote use the colloquial happy with me, we can certainly do things that are pleasing to God. And one of those things essentially is what the Bible says: without faith, it is impossible to please God, because in First Peter, the Bible says that we are saved by the power of God through faith, ready to be revealed in the last time. So the good Orthodox theologians will tell you you're saved in a kind of not yet. You're kind of saved. You are fully saved, but there's a kind of a here and now and a not yet. So we're not entirely done. That the full and complete essence of our salvation will be revealed when Jesus returns. And so a Christian struggles after being justified, which is being saved, God declaring you right by his son. Then you go into this long wrestling match with God as long as you're alive, called sanctification, where God is gently in the process of making you more like his son. And that's the long protracted struggle between, obeying God, pleasing God, learning what it means to follow after Christ and obey him. But because we fall short, that's why Jesus died. Where the sanctification process is not pretty. It's just not.
Right.
It's not all a bed of roses by any stretch of the means. But I think
Okay.
in one sense that struggle, Pierce, that suffering, um, uh, concordant with my studies and the things that I do. I'm not just adversely detached intellectually from my own personal life. I think it's the core string that goes through, that a Christian goes through, that helps to solidify why this is true. Some don't survive that process, some do, but that's the process of sanctification. So yes, you can please God as a Christian, but not in the sense of being justified before God. So it's not like
Okay.
you just get saved and do nothing. As James says, that you should bear the fruit of Christian testimony: patience, kindness, gentleness, humility, self-control, the fruits of the Spirit. If you're not bearing those, then maybe there's something wrong with your confession. You need to re-examine. But you're not justified by the works that you do in terms of being right with God, which is what the Jewish religion was that Jesus confronted.
I think I gotcha. I think I think we're on the same page here as far as what I think that you're saying. I
Sure.
think we're connecting here. So, if you were to discover like another religion, it doesn't really matter what religion, but if this religion didn't conform to the typical what most other religions other than Christianity do, where it's like you have to do this and this and this and this, and then that will make this God or gods happy. You'll be saved, or whatever terminology they might use. If that religion didn't conform to that normal, usual religious theory, I don't know what the word to use exactly, but if it didn't conform to that and you learned about it, would that somehow affect what you think about Christianity being unique?
Well, I can actually give you a solid example of, rather than a hypothetical.
Okay, sure.
Take Buddhism. There's a wide corpus of literature. There are a lot of atheist Buddhist philosophers out there. I'm not too terribly familiar with the literature on this, but it's in the modern world where It's called impermanence and contingency. So in Buddhist tradition, this idea of impermanence, that everything changes. Okay, there's nothing, like you aren't on a molecular level, or however you want. You had some hair fall out, or you had some skin fall off, or you gained some weight or whatever, but you're not the same Pierce as you were yesterday. That's the idea of impermanence. And in fact, in the totality of existence, there is nothing that is not impermanent. Does that make sense?
So everything's changing?
Everything changes. That's the gist of it. There's nothing that stays the same. Okay, that's impermanence. And then there's this idea that everything is contingent. Everything is, and this seems to be obvious to us, right? That my life is contingent upon my parents, or it's contingent upon the sun, or it's contingent upon eating or drinking. If I don't eat or drink, I'm not going to live very long, or if my brain goes without oxygen, whatever the case may be. It's very clear that we are contingent. If the trees don't get water, they will dry up, right? So this idea of contingency, everything is dependent on something else. And I hope I'm getting this right. But to your point, it's radically different, because Buddhism generally rejects. It's not a theistic tradition, if you will. It stands apart from theistic traditions that we most are more familiar with. So it's kind of antithetical along those lines, but I would call it a religion in a loose sense, about how I defined it earlier, with a set of precepts that deal with metaphysicals. Now, it seems like Buddhism doesn't allow for divinity or metaphysical or spiritual concepts, but Buddhism is very spiritual in a sense. It talks about several different things about. There's a fourfold noble truths where it talks. They're all about suffering, right? The existence of suffering. The second one is the cause of suffering. The third one is, I think, the end of suffering, and then the fourth is like the path or the way out of suffering. So it's all dealing with suffering, but it's not. It doesn't have a theodicy. There's no God. So, but it's interesting, Pierce, because I think in thinking about this, the one thing that I. So to your analogy, if there's a religion that is counter-religious, if you will, I think within any system that would crop up, and I see this with Watchmen. We see these little cults and religious offshoots pop up, these strange. We see this all the time, and that's what we do. We address these things, especially if they become popular. And so we're constantly addressing these ideas about these aberrant movements that come up. But within the Buddhist tradition, and I think this is to your point, hopefully, that consider their doctrine of impermanence for just a second. So what I'm saying is that I don't think that there is any tradition that doesn't, in some sense, get us at least an inkling of there being a divine reality. And so think in the Christian tradition, who is God? How is God antithetical to the two principles of impermanence and contingency? Well, God never changes, and God is not contingent. Okay. So that's a direct counter to the Buddhist claim there. But think about the concept of impermanence for just a second. What does it say? It's an idea that says everything changes. Now, change, Pierce? You think about that. Does the concept of impermanence in Buddhism, does that change? Did I lose you?
No, I got you. I guess it doesn't, but I mean, I don't know enough about Buddhism to say for sure, but it seems like that concept has probably been there since Buddhism was invented, I would assume. Right,
exactly. So I don't think it's too terribly complicated. I think it's a pretty simple idea to follow. That in Buddhism, where does this idea of impermanence come from? Our own observations, right? So, but there's nothing in the physical universe that says everything changes. This is a concept based on observation. We might call it something very similar to modern physical sciences. We make deductions based on what we see. But the idea of impermanence, if it did change, what's the antithesis of impermanence? It would suggest that something doesn't change. But if the concept itself doesn't change, then I think that betrays the concept itself. In other words, impermanence, the idea of impermanence, is the only thing in the universe that doesn't change. Now, to me, that says that that's a hint. It's a clue. It's not going to get you right to the front door of Christianity. But to me, I don't think there's any worldview that you could come up with that doesn't at some point, at least give you a sliver of truth about there being a transcendent, unchanging, timeless, non-contingent, self-sustaining reality to the universe. I think every world religion and cult I've ever seen has some kind of sense that there is an absolute, even in street epistemology, I would say, to liken it to SE, that they concede that there is something called objective truth. And so those kinds of things. So I just bring up Buddhism to show how even in an anti-theistic worldview, you can have a concept that points to an unchanging, non-contingent reality about reality, whether that's inside or outside of reality. There's something about it that points to a transcendent cause or a transcendent reality. So their truth that everything changes, thing in their philosophy that doesn't change. And I think that's a starting point for that. But to answer your question, I think that having looked at cults and world religions and other things that pop up all the time, I think that there's always going to be something where you can point to a clue that reminds you about who God is. Again, it's looking through the lens, right? It's how you see the world. And I think we all have a starting point. We can't all see our eyes, but I think it's all a matter of how you look at the world. But I hope that answers your question. I don't know if it does. Maybe it doesn't.
I don't think it actually did. I'm not trying to. I thank you for the answer. I really appreciate it. I think you may have sidestepped it accidentally. You definitely didn't do it on purpose. I'm not accusing you of that. But
well, ask me again in another way that I may be able to simplify what I'm saying.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to. Let's see how I can word this a little differently. So I guess Christianity is unique, and I guess it has a certain way of getting you from no belief to belief, I guess. Would you agree with that statement? Is that a fair statement to make?
Say it again. Say it again.
It has a unique way of getting you from no belief to belief. It's got a very unique way of getting you from no salvation to salvation. Is that?
Well, it's unique in that unlike other religions, I don't earn it. If that's
okay,
put it in a
you don't earn it.
Yeah,
gotcha. That's like exactly what I was trying to say, but in a roundabout way.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay,
that's good.
So if there was another religion that got you to God, to salvation without having to earn it, would that change? What would that change? I guess would that make Christianity not unique anymore?
Well, this is, and I think we've talked about this. This is my difficulty with hypotheticals in this regard, because
I understand
you could go anywhere with it. I might be able to think I know what you're saying, but in the end, I'm more of an evidence guy, right? So I go with what is, and I can try to imagine it. Like, what would happen? You might ask me, what would you do if your house burned down tomorrow, Dan? I don't know.
How about I reword this question a little bit? I think I can ask it in a better way that's not hypothetical.
All right.
Christianity being unique, we'll just, for sake of argument, I'm going to completely agree with you for this question. Christianity is 100% super unique. There's nothing out there that's like it. Does that uniqueness make it true?
Oh, okay. Absolutely fantastic question. No, of course not. No, I'm not arguing that. I do think it is. I don't know where you are on this, but I know that in general, I've seen quite a few street epistemologists kind of downplay when a Christian, especially an apologist, will make a case for a cumulative case of belief. I know that there have been many attempts, some not so charitable, where people are making a concerted effort to whittle away. Some will even call it bloviation or bloviating or bloviating or whatever. But my Christianity is definitely a cumulative case. And even if you whittled down each by each and said, well, that's a weakness. Well, that doesn't make it true. Well, true. I'm not saying it's like steel beams in a high rise or pillars in a cathedral. Okay, if you knock this one down, the architecture is designed that it can be supported by several other pillars, but there are several pillars holding up a building or several steel beams that hold up a building. And so for me, the structure is not entirely dependent upon knocking out one steel beam, nor am I saying that my whole thing is my whole edifice of Christian faith is standing on one pillar. You could knock apart, you could take out say the inerrancy of Scripture, and Christianity would still be true. You could write me off as a lunatic. It doesn't really get to the heart of what I believe. Just establishing that I'm nuts doesn't disprove Christianity either, right? So that's
no, of course not.
Yeah, I'm not saying that you say that, but yes, no, I'm not arguing that because it's unique, it must be true. I think uniqueness gives it plausibility, absolutely. But in a cumulative case structure, so that's kind of where I'm at. But I like how you simplified that much better.
Okay.
For me, I mean, maybe it works for other people, but I'm not you probably know I'm not a hypotheticals guy. I mean, I'm distrustful of hypotheticals in street epistemology anyway, because where are you taking me with this? But that's
why I wanted to reword that.
Yeah, so and that's a bias. That's a bias I'm constantly having to work through because not everybody does that. But anyway, there you go.
Okay. I'm going to try to be really careful with this question because I want to word it in a correct way. When I ask this, I'm not saying that this is you, because honestly, I don't know. But let's say I kind of want to go with your analogy. So you got a building, you got a bunch of pillars holding it up. And if we got all these pillars and, let's say you knock one down. Okay, the building's still standing. No problem. It's not going to completely collapse. I mean, maybe it would, but probably not if the architect was really good at making it, or engineer, whichever. It doesn't matter. If he's really good, you should be able to knock one down, and it's not really going to be a problem. But I guess what happens if all these pillars, if all of them have some sort of flaw? And I'm not saying that all of your reasons have some sort of flaw. But if all of them are weak, like this one's weak, this one's weak, this one over here is weak, this one is weak. I can't say that word.
Cumulative.
Yeah, that's the word. I can't pronounce that word. I've never been able to. Anyways, I guess, is that a good way to determine truth if you have a bunch of different pillars, but they all have some sort of weakness?
Well, I don't think that this is... I think I completely understand your question. If there are cracks in my pillars, do I want to go into that building? If I go into a church cathedral and I notice all the columns have cracks in them going all the way up to the ceiling, do I want to be in a worship service where all the columns got some questionable structural integrity? That's kind of what I understand you to be saying.
Yeah.
But I think this is the both the strength and the weakness of Christianity. And when I mean weakness, I'm referring to what Paul says in 1 Corinthians, where Jesus, the cross, Paul says, is foolishness to those who are perishing, to those on the outside. The cross is foolishness. And then he says the Greeks seek after wisdom and Jews seek after a sign, or maybe it's the other way around. But the cross for the Christian is the power of God for salvation. So the world mocks the cross. And then Paul goes on to say, it pleased God, in the wisdom of God, to use the foolishness of men, to use in God in his foolishness, if you will, is wiser than men. And God in his weakness is stronger than men. So let's take an analogy from a favorite story of mine in regards to pillars. And let's say you knock all of them down, Pierce. Let's just say they're completely obliterated. In the winter of 1852, 1853, there was a man named Augustus Dowd. He was on a miners' camp looking for food for, this is just at the onset of the California Gold Rush. He was off in Calaveras County, what is now Calaveras County in California, working on a ditch, looking for food and water, whatever. he stumbles into this grove of what we now know to be giant sequoia redwoods. And it's fascinating, Pierce, that the Western Indo-European American Europeans didn't know these trees existed until 1853, when Augustus found the first one. The first one is now called the Wonder Tree, and that's in Calaveras County. You can go to the Calaveras Grove of giant redwoods and you can see this. They were amazed by this tree. Augustus was telling the story of the tree he found. People didn't believe him. This thing was way over 300 feet tall, like 24 feet in diameter at its base. What do you think they did once people got word of this tree? They cut it down completely. And there's a newspaper article that talks about kind of the tragedy that this tree was believed to be 2,000 years old. I think they determined by the rings it's over 1,200 years old. But this thing stood for 1,200 years, and here these men come and they cut it down. You can go see the stump. You stand on the stump. They made a bowling alley back in the day. They made a bowling alley out of the fallen tree that you could dance on the tree. But anyway, the way in which one of the newspapers described it, it was like this horrible tragedy that this tree was cut down completely. Yeah. This beautiful native sequoia redwood had been standing for 1,200 years is just cut down and then treated as a circus sideshow. They sent pieces of it across the country and I think eventually the world. People didn't believe it. People did not believe when they set up the pieces of the tree that this was actually a tree. And so my point here is that imagine yourself in first century, and you are among a small band of people that realize that you're talking to the Son of God, that you understand that this guy is the fulfillment of the Old Testament. They're excited about this. Mary, the disciples, everybody, they may be idiots, but in fact, before the religious council in the book of Acts, Peter and the guys were considered idiotes, unlearned men. This is exactly where we get the word idiot from. And that means just simply unlearned or commoners. But they had been with Jesus. So here's this small band of people who are excited about, this is the Messiah. This is who Isaiah 53 prophesies. This is one greater than Jonah is here. We understand who you are, sort of, kind of. We think we do. And then suddenly, and they don't understand. They never really conceptually understand Jesus having to die. Then suddenly, your teacher is cut down. He's killed. It's over, and he's dead. Everything, all your pillars are gone, Pierce. Everything wiped out completely. And some of them went back to fishing, 2 of them went back to Emmaus, but they were all done. In fact, the night of Jesus' arrest, they all scattered. And I think this is both the quote unquote weakness, as I said earlier in Apostle Paul's language, that God using the foolishness of the cross. That all of our human expectations are obliterated. And what is instead set up is a much better way that nobody saw coming, really. I mean, Jesus is the only one who really understood what he came to do, even the disciples before he died. And even after he resurrected, the women who were at the tomb come to the disciples, the pillars of the foundation, the pillars of who will be the church going forward. And what did they say to the ladies, Pierce? Oh, that's just foolish talk. This nonsense, and even the guys going back to Emmaus are like, we heard the tomb was empty, but Thomas is like, well, unless I see the nail prints and the pierced in his side, the piercing, there you go, pierce, I won't believe. And so my point to what you're saying is that you can knock down my pillars. Maybe my pillars, Pierce, are embedded within them are flaws that begin with me, not necessarily the argument.
Maybe.
But so like, I think the big thing here is prayer and our expectation of what prayer is. A lot of people give up Christianity because my prayers, I'm talking to the carpet, I'm talking to the ceiling, I'm talking to the sky. But I think a weakness in that argument against Christianity from the perspective of unanswered prayers doesn't ever really address the expectations of what prayer is or an understanding of what prayer is. And so people's expectations are obliterated and that column falls down. Well, maybe the weakness in the column was people's expectations. What do you think this is supposed to do? What do you think prayer is supposed to be? Like, give me a cookie, God? Is that what you think prayer is? Yeah, if you're going to be disappointed, if that's what you think prayer is, that God is a gimme God. But I think Calvary is like that sequoia that gosh, we know something tragic just happened. All my expectations have been obliterated. This is a horrible, horrible thing. People shouldn't be dancing on the root of a 1,200-year-old tree. This just seems blasphemous. Something is wrong with this. We need to preserve these trees. And that's Abraham Lincoln. And then subsequently, that's how our park systems developed. We should not let this happen again, right? And so you can go to the Mariposa Grove or the Calaveras Grove or Yosemite. These are preserved national parks where you can't cut these trees down anymore. But Christianity turns our expectations, our human expectations, on our head. So, but all the arguments, Pierce, to get to your point, if all the arguments have a flaw in them, it's because we're human. Human beings constructed these logical arguments. Human beings do science. Human beings wrote the scriptures. Human beings don't ever fully understand what we're doing. When I was in the military, I was a private in the Army. One of my first days in my office at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, home of the 101st Airborne Division Air Assault, I'm in the bathroom of my office talking to a retired lieutenant colonel. And he was a country boy, and his name was George. And he says, "Now, Private Ray," he called me Daniel. He said, "Daniel, let me tell you something. This is the only room in the building where people know exactly what they're doing." And it turned out to be pretty true. It's kind of scary, but when you're in an adventure that's bigger than yourself, you want to go along and look like you know what you're doing, but really you're secretly sort of learning as you're going. You're watching other people. That's how I learned to swim. I never really had private swimming lessons, but I would go to the pool and I would watch people swim, and I'm like, "Oh, I don't want to do that. I can do that. I can try that. And I'm secretly watching people, but I don't know what I'm doing. And then, I see other people swimming, and I see the same kind of thing. And so anyway, yeah, that every argument that has ever been put forth for the existence of God has flaws in it because we made them. Even the scriptures, you can go into manuscript tradition and recognize that the scribes who were copying these things were.
I got a burning question for you, Daniel.
Okay.
It's absolutely just burning a hole right here, right now.
Ooh.
So you said that humans construct arguments, and I would agree with you. We're totally in agreement. Can a human construct an argument that is not flawed?
No.
A human cannot construct an argument that is not flawed.
I don't think so, because if that were the case, Pierce, you wouldn't have the discipline of. I have a little 1-minute video on my YouTube channel about kind of tongue-in-cheek about logic and reason, and I point out, I say, we champion this idea of logic, these ideas of logic and reason, but are they reliable? And then I go into the multitudinous number of verse and the multitudinous schools of philosophy that go back and forth, right? And if there was a perfect shut the mouth argument created by a human being for X, Y, or Z, we wouldn't be having discussions. Why do we have these discussions? Because men know, or think they know, that there's an inherent problem with that argument. And Christians will admit, the good ones will admit, that the Kalam cosmological argument doesn't get you to the New Testament. It's just a generic argument for a transcendent being that was created by an Islamic scholar about 1,000 years ago. And it's not a knockdown, because there's atheists that know Kalam and think they know what the problem is there. A lot of our arguments too, Pierce, are polemical in nature. So the danger, and I'll use my example here. I have to be careful when I'm talking about street epistemology as to not turn it into a complete polemical. I try to affirm what I think is good about it. I try to stay open and conversant with people who practice street epistemology. But it's a very temptation. The very temptation and the problem with my own assessment of it is that it can turn into just a polemic, just to be something against something, which I think largely is an atheist problem as well. It's just a polemic against theism, generally speaking. And so arguments can be polemical in nature. Arguments can be motivated by several different factors, bias or whatever the case may be. And if there was one perfect argument that could lead a Christian to lead a non-believer or a non-Christian to the cross, we would be using it all the time. It would be that red button. We'll just press this button and Pierce will be a follower of Jesus tomorrow. That doesn't work like that. And I think that's a flaw, that we think arguments are the best thing, right? They are part of what we do. That's part of what it means to be human, is to engage in dialogue. But I don't think that any human being who has ever sat down to put pen to paper, Thomas Aquinas, a lot of people criticize his conceptualizing theology and Aristotelian philosophy, or Platonism's influence in Christianity, Plato in the realm of ideas compared with the idea of a logos, Jesus. So there's a lot, I think I forgot the Christian father who said, what does Athens have to do with Jerusalem? And some people, even in the Christian faith, are like, well, we don't need the intellectual life. We don't need philosophy. It just gets in the way. We just need the gospel. I think if you look at the early Christians, they were well-rounded natural philosophers. They knew a little about everything. But I don't think there's any perfect argument, because we are, as human beings, our dialect. It's like I said at the beginning, when we build scientific tools, we build them with our inherent biases and ignorance in them, right? Some people can rely too heavily upon arguments. I think apologetics can suffer from this sometimes, that we are all about the arguments for theism and we neglect what the scriptures say. Or some people say that we should just focus on the scriptures and we don't need philosophical arguments. So there's a lot of back and forth on this, simply because I think that we are flawed and sinful human beings, and no one has perfectly arrived at making a perfect, sound argument. There are no perfect arguments. Even the Christian philosopher Alvin Plantinga, with his erudition and knowledge, is criticized for his warrant of true Christian belief, or his thesis on naturalism. Lots of philosophers have taken him to task on that. So no, even what I'm going to say here is going to engender, comments. But I'm convinced that just because we don't create perfect arguments, I'm not saying that there are no such, that we should abandon efforts to make persuasive arguments. I think that's absolutely what we do and will continue to do. And I think there's efficacy in trying to construct a reason for, and this is the Gospels give us every reason to give reasons for why we believe. 1 Peter 3:15, be ready to give hope, a defense for the hope that is in you. So yes, I say, let's go forward and make stuff. Let's create arguments. Let's create reasons for believing. Martin Luther used this phrase called sin boldly. Go out and figure out a way to proclaim the truth as best you know how, the best way that God has equipped you. And yeah, Luther's not advocating genuinely just sinning against God, but don't worry about your fallen nature when you're trying to proclaim the gospel. Acknowledge your fallen nature and go and proclaim the gospel imperfectly. Luther was not perfect. Augustine wasn't perfect. John Donne, you name any saint, and they will have their foibles, right? Even the most erudite scientist or philosopher or theologian, King David, was adulterous and murdered somebody. The people that God chose in the Bible were idiotes, commoners, unlearned. Paul says in 1 Corinthians, many of you were unwise. So God chooses the foolish things and to shame the wise, and through the world's wisdom. So that's why God gave us Christ and used flawed human beings to give a defense for what he has done for us. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I think it did. And I have another question. So let's just say I have this belief. It can be a belief about anything. What it is, the subject matter is pretty relevant. I'm not even going to give an example. If you need an example, I can provide one. But let's just say I have this belief, and I have many different arguments, reasons, whatever you want to call it. Doesn't really matter. But let's say I can recognize, or maybe somebody else can recognize it. Maybe it's better for this example if I recognize that each one of them has some sort of flaw. That if I take reason number one, I can see that there's a flaw here. Number two, I can notice a different kind of flaw. Number three, I can see a different kind of flaw, and so on and so on. Should I still hold this belief as true? Or I guess what should I do?
I hate to tell you this, but 90% of what you just said, I lost. I heard one. I heard one. I heard two. Let me tell you what I think I heard you say, and then you can fill in the gaps. If you want to type it in the chat, I'll try to take a look. But I think I heard you say, if I found a flaw in this one, or if I found a flaw in that one, what do I do with the flaws?
Can you hear me better now? Am I still cutting out?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, you can hear me, or I'm still cutting out. I don't know which.
I can hear you now. I can
You can
hear
hear me now. Okay, perfect. I'll just kind of go over that again. So I have a belief in something, and I have several different arguments. Let's just say I have 3 different arguments or reasons, whatever you want to say. And if I examine the first one, I can notice that there's a flaw. And then in the second one, I notice that there's a flaw in a different way. And then the third one, I notice there's a flaw in some other way, not in the same way. Should I still hold this belief as true, even though I know that there's flaws in the arguments?
I don't think that there are any belief systems or any beliefs that we hold that don't have weaknesses in them. I would say, other than apart from what I believe to be, I mean, we're talking about constructed human arguments, correct?
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah.
Okay. So I don't think that because something has got a flaw in it, again, I think that is just the fallibility and the weakness of human beings. But that doesn't, you're not going to find a system, whether it's science or philosophy or theology, where theologians are crafting arguments based on the Bible, interpretations of text, or philosophers are crafting arguments about truth, or scientists are making conclusions about their data. The history of science, I think, demonstrates that we are fallible interpreters of what we see. In Copernicus's time, he wrote the letter to the Pope in the opening of his Revolutions of the Heavenly Spheres. And he says, the reason I'm kind of hesitant to publish this, I'm paraphrasing, because I can see why people might want to hiss me off the stage for presenting the idea of a moving Earth. Because you go outside, you stand up there, it doesn't feel like you're moving. How can the Earth be moving, Nicholas? What are you, insane? So, the history of science, I think, shows the flaws in our reasoning and the flaws in how we interpret reality. But just because, Aristotelian cosmology with the Earth at the center stood as the scientific assumption, foregone conclusion for 2,000 years, from Aristotle until Copernicus. And then, you had Kepler and Tycho Brahe, and then Galileo, and then Newton, men who were standing on 2 different sides of the fence. One was a geocentric, and these were the pioneers that helped move the universe from a geo to a heliocentric solar system. But imagine being in a position where 2,000 years of science and philosophy are overturned in less than a century, Piers. It's remarkable. You had the Protestant Reformation, the Counter-Reformation, and then you had Kepler thinking that Kepler almost comes up with gravity, but these men realized that even in the midst of this European Reformation, there was a reformation going on in the heavens as well, that the universe was no longer centered upon the Earth, so it seemed. So yes, but that doesn't, just because something we can see clearly in hindsight that their idea was flawed, it stood for 2,000 years, more or less, if you went with Aristotle. And that was not just the church's thing. That was the culture. That was what they taught in the early universities, the Aristotelian assumptions about matter and truth. And this is why you have Aquinas combining Aristotle and metaphysical theology and scripture. And you have his work, Summa, from all of that. But Aristotle was not right about everything. He was not an experimental scientist. But yet we rested both of our elbows, culturally speaking, on Aristotle and the Bible. And our interpretations of the Bible even are flawed. There are a lot of people that we deal with at Watchmen, a lot of cults and movements who interpret scripture in very strange ways. And you can see by their practices where that leads. So yeah, I don't think we can ever. I don't think there is an extant in our current library of knowledge any particular argument that doesn't have problems, because we are human and they're self-created. I like C.S. Lewis. I think he has a lot of problems in some of the things he says about scripture or God, but I don't throw out everything that he says because of that. I take what I think is useful and good, and I don't listen to the rest of it. And I think that's kind of the way we all approach things. I like what this guy says here, but I don't like this, and I don't like this. And we can see weaknesses and what we think to be weaknesses in other people's arguments. So yeah, I just think that's the nature of human beings. You have to accept something. And I don't think there's anything out there that is a perfect knockdown argument. That's a flawless, perfectly knockdown argument. I think there are many really good arguments. Let me say that in
Okay.
that I think you can have a really solid argument for something, but it has problems. This is what is in cosmology. This is exactly the state of cosmology today. Inflationary theory, Alan Guth, 1980. Why is all the cosmic microwave background radiation light, why is it all the same temperature? Well, it must have been touching at one point. Well, how can we explain that? Well, Alan Guth comes up with this idea of inflation, that something like in 10 to the minus 43 seconds, the universe expanded exponentially, which would account for why all the leftover light particles in the early universe would be the same temperature. But as of yet, there are no solid theory about inflationary cosmology. Nobody knows what started the inflation, really. Nobody knows what put the brakes on inflation. And there's this mysterious particle called the inflaton. Nobody's seen that. People are looking for the gravitron, which is supposedly a dark matter particle. People are in search of the dark matter particle. So we have these arguments, and even in quantum theory, like Sean Carroll and another cosmologist can have two different quantum theories that make the same prediction. So Carroll can use this model, and Leonard Susskind can use this model or something, and they can make the same identical prediction, but they don't know the mechanism that actually leads to that. They get the same outcome, but the mechanism that gets them there is still unknown. So there's a ton of quantum theories. So all that to say, these are good theories. They seem to have some explanatory scope and power, and I think good arguments have explanatory scope and power, despite whatever flaws you might think that they have.
Kind of going back to what you were saying just like a few moments ago with regarding how like 2,000 years ago, there was different beliefs on how the Earth was, right? So why do you think I assume that I pretty much know that you don't believe the same things as people believed back 2,000 years ago about the Earth and, let's say, the sun goes around the Earth, etc. I think that's what you're getting at. I didn't write it down. Maybe I should have, because my memory is like the memory of a goldfish. But I guess, why do you believe what you believe today about that subject rather than what they believed 2,000 years ago?
So your question is, why do I believe what I believe about the universe today and not what Aristotle said?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's a good question. I think if I had been alive at the time of Copernicus, or prior to Copernicus, I'm sure I would have been an Aristotelian myself. I mean, that was the dominant school of the universe. And so, and this gets back to what I said earlier about our scientific instrumentation. They're fantastic, like the James Webb Telescope. It's designed to see infrared light. So we build this telescope to see a specific kind of light. But by building that kind of telescope, what do, Piers? We naturally, by selectivity, we eliminate possibilities of what this telescope could do. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, it can't pick up all the other light.
Yeah, and so if we get back to this idea of the Galileo's telescope, people didn't want to look into it because they thought it was enchanted or witchcraft or something. But in the early telescopes, not all people believe that, but some did. In the early telescopes, what did you have to do to see through them? You had to close one eye, right? So the telescope became a way to see things, but you had to close one eye. In fact, when you close one eye, you lose depth perception, don't you? And I think a lot of science has revealed, a lot of our instruments have revealed a great deal more about our universe. We went to the moon, of course, than what was available to the ancient folks. Aristotle didn't have a Hubble Space Telescope, obviously, or the Saturn V rocket. So obviously our technology has improved, and it has enabled us to see things that they didn't see. The Hubble Deep Fields, of course, you made the video about that. But I think even with the technology that it is, I concede that, I believe the Earth is a sphere. I believe it goes around the sun, and I believe our satellite technology, and there's a lot of things that confirm. But given all of that, I also concede that our instrumentation and the ideas of our cosmos today are still as limited as Galileo's telescope in some sense, because we are still building our biases into these. So in light of the current evidence, I think I believe the universe, the science, I just got it through a podcast with a cosmologist, astrophysicist, Jeff Zwerig, of Reasons to Believe. And he looks at all the alternative models of the universe and our beginning and assesses them and asks the question, do these get around the beginning of our universe? So standard Big Bang cosmology looks like it's leading us back to a solid beginning of our universe. And anytime you go, quote, beyond the Big Bang, you are into metaphysical speculation about what may have, quote unquote, preceded it. But Jeff argues in his book and in our podcast that all the models that exist that try to get around the beginning seem to suggest a beginning. So that solidly squares, not that I needed science to do that, but that solidly squares with Genesis, that there is a beginning to our universe. And so for me, Pierce, even though the scientific data may change over the years, I think that there's finally nothing in the physical cosmos for me that contradicts anything in the Bible. I recognize there are secular theories that contradict what Scripture may say, but I think finally that our scientific knowledge is always changing. Scripture does not change, and I think that even if someone were to find a successful model for our universe that seems to overturn the beginning, it would only be a model, because no one can create a cosmogony, an origin of the universe in a laboratory. So at best, they would be speculative theories. But I think that science is pretty solid on our solar system, and we've been to other planets and we know these things. But there's nothing in what we've discovered that conflicts with anything in Genesis, except the theories that the interpretations and theories that men have when they look at the data. So I go along with everybody else, in terms of understanding science in a modern sense, what it finds. I try to understand the interpretations and the data of the physical world from a scientific and a Christian and a non-Christian perspective. I interviewed Stephen C. Meyer last year. We talked about cosmology and biology and the differences in the secular and Christian ideas. And so I think that science is an ever-growing, ever-changing field. I've talked to a lot of Christians in the sciences who see full compatibility with Genesis. But I think by and large, because of our technology, obviously, we have a much different perspective on the universe than our ancient forefathers. But however, I think too that Moses knew long before any astrophysics that we had a beginning to the universe. And I don't think that's ever going to, no matter what the world comes up with, I think that Genesis is going to stay true to what it said. So I'll go along with contemporary science. I'm not a scientist. I'll examine and study what science says, but I will draw my own conclusions, I guess. But we don't have the space for a whole scientific thing. But I think modern scientific technology has given us a much different perspective on the universe than what was known 2,000 years ago, obviously.
Okay. We just have a couple minutes here. So if you don't mind, I think I would just like to share, I guess, some information about my position and why I am at my position. And we've talked about this in the past, but I think we may have hit a crux of why you hold your belief and why I don't actively hold a similar belief. I think that makes sense in my head. So I guess it seems like you said that there's no, a human cannot construct an argument that doesn't have a flaw. And I'm not sure that I don't necessarily agree with you, but I do see where you're coming from to a certain extent, I suppose. But I would believe that there can be arguments that are sound, and it can get you to a very, very high degree of confidence. I suppose that an argument, you can't know anything for like absolutely certain. I could be living in a simulation right now, and I guess that would make everything I experienced false, so the arguments don't even matter. But I guess if I see an argument and let's say X is true, and I got argument A, B, C, and if I see a flaw in each one of those arguments, that doesn't necessarily mean the claim of, what did I say, X being true? That doesn't mean that X is untrue. It just means that those reasons have flaws in them. So I shouldn't conclude that X is true. X is either true or untrue based on the flawed arguments. So that's kind of where I stand as far as pretty much all God claims, I suppose. So maybe that clarifies a little bit, because I know we've been going kind of back and forth on that. But
I only caught the tail end of the
oh man,
it's cutting out so bad. I didn't hear.
Shoot.
I don't know what's going on. It was fine for the first half hour, 45 minutes. So I'm sure your guests heard it. I'm sure it was on the video.
Hopefully. You want me to try to repeat it?
If you can, I mean, it comes in like 31 second. I can hear you say something, and then it goes Zoom robot, and then it comes back in 1 second.
Weird. I wonder if it could be my internet. I don't even know. I hope it's not my internet.
I don't know. If you can try to say it in a second again, is it something you want me to respond to, or are you just offering your thoughts?
Just kind of offering my thoughts. I mean, if you wanted to respond to it, you very well could, but yeah, I mean, I'll try to be quick with it, maybe. So,
because I do have to wrap up here.
Okay,
so it's not
let's
really,
wrap up then.
Yeah, it's not really something I could respond to. I mean, we can set up another time for maybe another chat.
Well, maybe if it came through on the video, and you can watch the last minute of this video, and then that way you'll get it. Let's just do that. All right.
Yeah, because I'm sure it's something we've already talked about, but I just didn't hear most anything you said.
Maybe. Yeah. Anyways, it doesn't matter. We can call it a wrap here. Thanks, Daniel, for speaking to me. I do appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate. Thank you for allowing me to blab. I apologize up front. Your friends are probably going to get you for letting me talk so long.
I tend to do that.
No, you're probably gonna get criticism for letting me blab without pushing back. You know, I see that all the time. That's just speaking from experience. Maybe not. Maybe people will say, but they'd be like, Pierce, you should have said this. Pierce, you should have said that.
They probably will, but they may also be like, wow, he was really patient. So, I mean, it can go both ways, I suppose.
I mean, this is stuff just for your audience. This is stuff we talked about. We've already talked about a lot of it.
Yeah.
But now you're not cutting out. You want to try again? I'll give you one more minute here.
Sure. Okay. So, I guess. So you tend to. I think you believe that humans cannot construct an argument that has like 100% certainty, and in some sense, I agree with that. But then the other sense, I think that an argument can get you to a very, very high confidence, maybe not like 100%, right? Yeah. I always might be living in the matrix or something like that. Who knows? But I would say if I take a claim X, and I see argument A, B, and C, and I can point out, or I can see like the flaw in A, I can see the flaw in B, I can see the flaw in C. Mm-hmm. That makes X. Does that make X untrue? No, of course not. That doesn't make X untrue, but at the same point, it just doesn't make X true. So I guess that's just kind of where I stand as far as any God claim that I have come across in any argument for that God claim. I've always been able to point out and say, hey, here's a flaw here, here's a flaw here, here's a flaw here. So it's just kind of like, I don't know if that's true or not. Yeah,
okay. I fully heard what you said there.
Sweet.
No interruptions. So that I don't, I think I've said, I'm not arguing that my arguments or my beliefs make them true. I think truth exists apart whatever argument we construct. And I think that many street epistemologists would agree with this idea of objective truth, that we don't create. Some people will say we create truth, whatever. I don't think that's true. And I don't think an argument makes something true. I think it lends credence to its plausibility. And I know we've talked about my pushback to you on and you've shared with me your agnostic atheism, and I've in candidness I have questioned that. I'm like, well, I don't know, Pierce. You're an anonymous dude online. You're not even, your name isn't even Pierce. I don't know if I should trust you or not. But anyway, I think that in order to know that something is flawed, requires a standard of truth. And that's what I was talking about earlier, seeing through your eyes, seeing with your eyes, not seeing your eyes themselves. I think standards are axiomatics, are axioms, our properly basic understanding, our foundational epistemology, whatever that might be, is a pair of eyes through which we see things. And if you see flaws, that reveals that your eyes are seeing the world a certain way. And I know we don't have time today, maybe another conversation, but I think in terms of talking about flaws and arguments, I know from a Christian perspective, we would analyze that from the point of biblical truths. In terms of, you know, what gods are true and what gods are not true, we would use a standard of truth to analyze other worldviews and systems. So I think if you're introducing flaws, the concept of flaws into an argument, you are assuming or presuming a certain standard of truth, which is a whole other discussion, of course. But I think that, would you agree? You would need a standard of truth in order to assess an argument as being flawed?
I think so. It probably depends on your definition of standard of truth, but I would agree that you have to, with regards to anything, I say any argument, I guess you have to have at least one axiom. You have to make at least one assumption. So yes, I think.
Okay. Yeah, I think we have agreed on that in that sense. Yeah. It's just we differ on the axiomatic principles, foundational principles of what constitutes truth. So yeah. All right. Let's. I got to get my day rolling here. I've enjoyed the conversation. Would love to keep going, but my Saturday is kind of busy.
Okay. And that is fair. That's what we agreed upon. So I thank you, Daniel, and I will end the broadcast right here.
All right.